I live in a pretty rural area in Ohio. Last fall, my girlfriend and I decided it would be fun to go to this local farm near my house that had corn mazes, hay rides, and a bunch of other stuff to do. We met up on Friday evening after we got off of work and drove to the farm. As we pulled in, we took in the beautiful scenery that surrounded us, from the huge pumpkin patches to the farm animals roaming around the fields. It was nice for my girlfriend to get away from the city life where she spent the majority of her time. To really disconnect from social media and the outside world, we agreed to leave our phones inside the car as we got out so we could soak in the beautiful nature upon us. It was a pretty cold evening, and the temperature continued to drop as the night went on. But that didn't stop us from having a good time. We went through the hay maze, corn maze, barn, and even shot off some pumpkins through a pumpkin launcher. After eating inside, then buying some apple cider and pumpkins, it was starting to get dark out. By now, most of the families there had gone home, so it seemed like it was just us and maybe a dozen other people. While sitting inside, I picked up a pamphlet that listed their hayride schedule. My girlfriend had never gone on a hayride before, and I only went on one once when I was really young, so it was something we both wanted to do. Unfortunately, we missed the 7 p.m. hayride by 30 minutes, but I noticed that there was one more that started at 8:30. I talked it over with my girlfriend, and we decided that we'd wait an extra hour to catch the last hayride of the night so we'd get the full experience. We walked back out to the car, dropping off our pumpkins and our apple cider. After waiting around for a while, it was almost time to walk back over to the farm to go on the hayride. Again, we left our phones in the car. Right as we got out, it started to drizzle, which quickly turned into a steady rainstorm. Fortunately for us, I had a couple ponchos left in the trunk from the last time I went camping, and we quickly put them on. We weren't sure if they would cancel the ride due to the weather, but we decided to go in and ask anyways. To our surprise, the guy who worked in the little restaurant area that we ate in before was going to be the driver for the hayride, and was completely fine with taking us despite the cold, rainy weather. We followed him over to the spot where we waited as the tractor pulling the passengers behind finally arrived after their ride. By this time, it was only 8:20, so we stood under the pavilion as we waited for any other last-minute people to show up. Believe it or not, we were the only ones who came for the ride. The driver explained how he'd typically call it off if there were less than 10 people, but he seemed to like us and still offered to take us anyways. There were 2 carts attached to the tractor, each one having a rectangular shape with hay along the caged walls for seats. My girlfriend wanted to sit in the cart furthest from the tractor in the back, so we climbed in and the driver closed our door, locking us in. Since the farm covered so many acres, the rides typically lasted an hour to an hour and a half, depending on which route we took. We set off into the dark, slowly moving along as the rain poured. Being alone in the middle of nowhere was admittedly pretty creepy, even though I'm not one to usually get freaked out by stuff. After about 20 minutes or so, my girlfriend let out a scream as she looked behind us. I turned around to see where she was looking, but couldn't see anything. I said, "What's wrong?" And she looked at me with sheer horror on her face. She said, "I could have sworn I just saw someone run across the path between the cornfields." I laughed, assuming it was an animal or she was just seeing things, and explained how she probably worked herself up since she was all paranoid. My eyes were getting heavier as the ride went on, feeling the fatigue from the long day start to set in. My relaxed mood instantly changed when my girlfriend started screaming again, telling me to turn around and look. I snapped my head around quickly, wanting to see what she was seeing. Behind us, standing in the middle of the narrow path, was a silhouette of a person standing in the road, staring at us. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, wondering to myself why someone would be out in the middle of nowhere on a cold, rainy night. A few seconds passed, and I watched as the person started walking behind us, moving at the same exact speed of the tractor pulling us. I got up and walked as close as I could to the tractor and yelled to the driver, "Hey, there's someone following us." Despite shouting, my words were drowned out by the insanely loud engine of the tractor, and he didn't even hear a thing I said. As I walked back by my girlfriend, who was terrified, I noticed that the person was gone. Feeling a huge sense of relief, I finally began to calm down again. After maybe 20 minutes, the creepy encounter finally started to slip our minds. We were making an L-shaped turn to the right as we were looking into the dark fields. Out of nowhere, a figure popped out of the cornfield and jumped onto the side of our trailer, hanging onto the cage now just a foot or 2 away from us. We both screamed, hoping that the driver would hear us. Now up close, I was able to see that the person was dressed in a clown costume and was holding a knife in their hand. I reacted the only way I could, and I kicked where his hand was holding onto the cage. Thankfully, it worked, and the clown let go and screamed in pain. After that, we counted down the minutes and hoped the ride would end soon. Once we finally got back, we explained everything to the driver when he let us out. He seemed a little shocked, but didn't really take us too seriously. We left that night as fast as we could and have never been back since. I'm not sure if it was someone just playing games or what, but I'm glad we never had to find out. It was a cool fall night in October as I was driving back home from my friend's house after having a campfire. It was approaching 1 a.m., and I felt myself drifting asleep since I had not been used to staying up that late. I remember rolling the windows down in hopes of the cool breeze keeping myself awake. The drive from my friend's house wasn't a very far ride, usually about 15 to 20 minutes, mainly through back roads and parkways. I was usually one of the only cars on the road. That quickly changed as I noticed myself approaching a white car in the distance with its four-way hazards blinking on and off. As I neared the car, I noticed that it had a temporary tag on the back that looked to be torn in half. Considering it was an older car, I found it a little strange, but didn't think much of it at all. In addition to that, it also looked like the car was abandoned. The road I was on at this time had several windy hills. As I continued down the road, I quickly lost sight of the mysterious car as the road twisted and turned. Trying to keep myself awake, I turned the radio all the way up to ensure my wakefulness as I ventured home. As I approached the final couple minutes of the drive, I vaguely noticed a set of car lights behind me in the distance. Strangely, it seemed like a car was quickly catching up behind me. I'm usually never a slow driver, but I checked the speedometer to make sure I wasn't going super slow. I was going 10 over the speed limit. By now, the car was practically tailgating me, and I remember thinking to myself, screw it. I sped up so this car would give me some space. Now going 20 over, I assumed I would be fine and not have to worry about this person practically hitting my car from behind. Oddly enough, the car was still extremely close to my back bumper. I'm also pretty sure they had their brights on since I could barely see anything from the blinding light hitting my eyes. I decided to pull off to the side of the road and let them pass. I felt myself turn pale for a second as I looked behind me to see that the car had stopped and parked right behind me. I waved my hand out of the driver's side door in hopes they would pass, but the car just stayed there. The feeling of panic and worry crept in quickly. I turned off my hazards and decided it would be best to keep driving. I called my friend that I was just with and told him what was going on. At first, he was pretty amused by my worries and had a good laugh, but quickly changed his tone when he realized how serious and worried I sounded. He suggested that I try to lose the car before going home, which was definitely not a bad idea. I made a few quick turns and practically floored it through this neighborhood that I was very familiar with, which gave me a bit of an advantage considering I was driving in the dark and there were no streetlights. The second I lost the headlights behind me, I quickly shut off my lights and pulled all the way up this long driveway tucked away behind a few trees and bushes. I sat in my car, panicked, just watching the road behind me. Suddenly, I could see headlights approaching on the road behind. I turned around in my seat to see if I could get a better look at the car. My jaw dropped. It was the same car that I had passed earlier on the drive home. Still on the phone with my friend, I filled him in on what had just happened. Out of panic, I threw my car in reverse down the driveway. I needed to get away. As I put my car in drive, I glanced at my rearview mirror and felt a sense of terror overcome me. The car was backing out of a driveway at the end of the street and was turning around towards me. I've never driven so fast in my life. I just wanted to get home. As soon as I thought I lost the car again, I quickly opened my garage and parked my car inside. I ran inside my house and made sure all of the doors and windows were closed and locked. I was running off of pure adrenaline at this point. 45 minutes or so had passed, and I was starting to get tired again. I got myself ready for bed and would occasionally look out the window of my room upstairs. All I saw was darkness. I still felt worried, but the sense of relief was prevailing. At this point, I was so tired and I knew I had to be up early tomorrow. Just as I was falling asleep, I was startled awake to hear the noise of a car outside. Trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid, I forced myself to stay in my bed and not get up to look, until I heard a car door shut. I sat up in bed and looked out the window to see where these noises were coming from. My heart sank. The same creepy white car that followed me earlier was now parked right outside my house. I called my friend back out of pure shock. He sounded groggy, but I assumed he had been asleep. The tone in his voice quickly changed when I told him that the car is right outside my house, and I heard a door shut. He told me to hang up and call the police, which is exactly what I did. I spoke with dispatch on the phone and explained everything that was happening that night. He told me to stay in the house and find something to defend myself with. He told me to stay put and that he was sending an officer over to my house right away. I sat in my bed holding a bat, frozen in fear. The most disturbing part of this was that I clearly heard a car door shut before, meaning there was a chance that this person was no longer sitting outside in the car. My mind was racing. I was sitting in complete silence. Suddenly, I heard an extremely loud bang coming from the main floor towards my backyard. I called 911 again to tell them what was going on. As I was explaining to the dispatcher, I heard it again, but louder, until I heard a huge bang and then the sound of shattered glass. I could already picture it. The person shattered the French doors of my house facing the backyard leading to the deck. I was beyond terrified. My heart rate went through the roof and I was profusely sweating. The dispatcher told me to stay put and not to move or make a sound. He said the officer was almost there. Every second that went by felt like an eternity. I sat in my bed, staring at the door. Then, I began to hear the slightest footsteps coming up my stairs. The person was tiptoeing, clearly not wanting me to hear anything, but I knew. I felt myself shift into fight or flight mode as the footsteps grew louder and closer. I could hear the person walking from room to room upstairs looking for me. Then, I heard a bang on my door. Then another. Then another. The banging grew louder with each hit. In a panic, I began to barricade my door. I pushed my dresser, mattress, and just about everything I could use up against the door. It was a man. He began screaming manically as he tried to break through my door. Fortunately, my barricade seemed to buy me time. I ran to the window and saw the police lights in my driveway. I yelled out to the window to the police and told them that he was right outside my door and I needed help immediately. They kicked in my front door, and I could hear them running up the stairs. I could hear the huge commotion going on right outside my door, but I couldn't tell what was happening. After about 30 seconds, I heard the officer putting him in handcuffs, and he told me it was safe to come out. I slowly opened the door to see a man lying face down on the floor, staring at me. On his right side, I saw what looked to be a 3-foot-long machete and a bunch of rope. He had dark eyes and this menacing look on his face. I've never seen anything like it. Although I'll never know what his exact intentions were that night, I'm glad I'll never have to find out. About a month later, I learned from my lawyer that he was in psychosis and had a delusion that I stole his car, which is why he followed me home. He was placed into a high-security psych ward. Before this ever happening, I've always considered myself to have terrible luck, and this event confirmed that for me. I own a small landscaping company that I started up 2 years ago. I currently have 5 employees, and the business has done well up to this point. Every time we get a new customer, I always go to that person's house to meet them, form a relationship, then do the first job myself to make a good first impression before I send my guys over there in the future. Early in the week, sometime during the day, I got a call from an unknown number. Assuming it was some kind of scam, I didn't answer. Shortly after, I received a voice message, so I opened it, putting the phone up to my ear. It sounded like an old man who spoke with a thick accent. He mentioned that he saw my ad in the paper and wanted me to give him an estimate for mowing his lawn. I called him back and briefly spoke with him. I was already tied up for the day, but I told him I could stop by later that night around 7. He agreed, telling me to take a look at the yard before knocking on his door. I hung up and got back to work. Once I finished up my last house for the day, I drove over to the address he gave me to take a look at the yard. I pulled in his driveway and got out. I walked around the front yard, gauging its size. The front yard wasn't very big at all, and I started to walk around the side of the house towards the back. As I rounded the corner, I was taken back when I realized that the yard was massive. It was probably at least an acre in size. I was pretty surprised, not expecting to see a yard this big. It was starting to get a little dark, and I walked all the way to the back of the property as I tried to get a better look. As I started walking back towards the house, I noticed the light inside flip on and watched as the man I chatted with earlier was coming out to ask about the pricing. As I was about maybe 50 yards away, he yelled, "Stop, don't take another step forward." It took me off guard, since I thought he'd be expecting me. I yelled out, "It's Ryan, remember? We talked on the phone earlier. I'm the landscaper." The man paused for a minute, not saying anything. I continued walking towards him, assuming he would realize it was me. As I got maybe 20 yards away from him, I noticed he was holding something in his hands, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. As I approached, the old man yelled at me again, telling me to stop. I was able to finally make out the object he was holding, realizing that it was a shotgun. I put my hands up saying, "Whoa man, you don't need to point that thing at me. I'm just the landscaper. I'm here to give you the estimate, remember?" He looked at me like I wasn't making any sense and didn't say a word back to me. As I continued to approach him, he fired a shot directly towards me, saying, "That was your warning. Don't take a step closer. Next one's going in your head." I was horrified. He pulled out his phone and started talking to someone. I didn't understand who it was until I heard him say, "There's someone trying to break in my house. I need an officer over here right away." I was so confused and didn't understand why he was acting like we never talked before. Then it dawned on me that I probably had the wrong address. I tried explaining it to the man, but he wasn't having it. I stood there with my hands up for probably 10 minutes until the police arrived. I was instantly arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. When I spoke with the deputy, it sounded like they were totally siding with the old man's story over mine, and I felt a sense of hopelessness. After trying to explain to the police that I was the landscaper, they came back in to tell me that I was free to go. At this point, I was so confused and had no idea what had just happened. It turns out, the old man was suffering from dementia and had completely forgotten that he ever contacted me for landscaping. Thankfully, I was sent home after the police learned it was a huge misunderstanding. I'm not upset at the old man at all since it wasn't his fault, but I'm just thankful that I didn't get shot.